The shock of betrayal when my brother took the inheritance was something I never imagined I would have to experience, because betrayal from a stranger can wound you, but betrayal from your own blood has a way of reaching into the deepest parts of your soul and tearing it apart in ways words cannot fully capture. I remember the moment with such clarity, the way the news was broken to me, the way the papers had already been signed, the way everything that was promised to me, everything that was supposed to be mine not out of greed but out of fairness and justice, was gone in the blink of an eye, all because my brother had decided that his desires outweighed mine, that his sense of entitlement was stronger than my right to what our parents left behind. It was not just money, it was not just property, it was the legacy of our family, the hard work of generations before us, the blood and sweat poured into building something that could provide security, pride, and stability, and in one swift action he managed to erase my place in that legacy as if I never existed, as if my struggles, my sacrifices, my loyalty to the family meant absolutely nothing. What hurt the most was not just the loss of the inheritance itself but the realization that my brother had looked me in the eye for months, maybe years, pretending to be my ally, pretending to care for me, pretending to respect me, while in the shadows he was weaving a plan that would cut me out completely. I replayed every conversation we ever had, every smile, every promise, every reassuring word, and suddenly all of it felt poisoned, all of it felt like part of the act that led me into a false sense of security. I started questioning myself, wondering if I had missed the signs, wondering if I was foolish to have trusted so blindly, wondering if there had always been greed simmering in his heart that I was too naive to see. The betrayal made the walls of my home feel different, the memories of our childhood together felt corrupted, and even the photographs hanging on the walls seemed to mock me, as if the brother who once stood beside me in those moments had never really been there at all, or worse, had always been there but with a mask covering his true intentions. My chest felt heavy with rage, and yet beneath that rage there was a sadness so deep that it made me feel hollow, because losing money or property is one thing, but losing the trust and bond with the person you grew up with, the person you shared meals with, the person you defended and protected, that is a wound that festers and lingers no matter how much time passes. I thought back to the sacrifices I had made, the nights I stayed awake working, the times I gave up my own dreams to support the family, the times I went without so that he could have more, because in my heart I believed that siblings are meant to lift each other up, not push each other down. I thought of how I had defended him when others doubted him, how I had stood by him even when he made mistakes, how I had believed in him when no one else did, and now all of that loyalty, all of that love, all of that effort seemed like a cruel joke, because he had taken the very thing that symbolized fairness and turned it into a weapon to hurt me. The betrayal did not just leave me angry, it left me questioning everything I knew about family, about loyalty, about trust. If my own brother could do this to me, what did that say about the bonds I believed were unbreakable? If the person who grew up under the same roof, who shared the same parents, the same meals, the same laughter, could steal from me without hesitation, then who in this world could I ever truly rely on? That thought haunted me in ways I cannot fully describe, because betrayal is not just about the action itself, it is about the destruction of your faith in people, the crumbling of your belief that love. Each day that followed the betrayal felt like walking through a storm of emotions, one moment filled with burning anger, the next moment drowning in sorrow, and then caught in waves of disbelief that this was actually happening. I would wake up in the middle of the night with my chest tight, thinking of how easily he had dismissed me, how easily he had chosen greed over blood, and I wondered what kind of person I had been living beside all these years without really knowing. It felt like I had lost not just the inheritance but also my sense of identity, my place in the family, and the trust that I once carried like armor. The betrayal carved a scar inside me that words cannot erase, because it was not just about taking what belonged to me, it was about telling me, without saying a word, that I did not matter, that my worth was disposable, that my place in the family tree could be cut off without hesitation. It was about watching someone I loved choose selfishness over compassion, choose deceit over honesty, choose destruction over unity, and no matter how much time passes, the memory of that choice will never fade, because it marked the day I stopped seeing my brother as a brother and started seeing him as a stranger who wore a familiar face. The shock was not just a moment, it was a wave that kept crashing again and again every time I looked around and realized what had been stolen from me, not just physically but emotionally. Every corner of my life bore the mark of his betrayal, and no matter where I turned, I could not escape the echo of his actions. It was in the silence of my room, in the emptiness of my heart, in the bitterness that lingered on my tongue every time his name was spoken, and it became a part of me in a way I never wanted but could not undo. The inheritance was gone, but the betrayal, the wound, the hollowing of my trust remained, shaping me, hardening me, and changing the way I saw not just him but the world around me. The pain of being stripped of what was rightfully mine went far beyond the material loss, because it wasn't just about wealth or property, it was about dignity, justice, and recognition of my place in the family. What belonged to me was not handed to me as charity, it was something earned by the balance of fairness, by the will of those who came before me, by the sweat and struggle that our parents endured to ensure their children would never have to suffer the way they did. To be cut away from that was like being told I was invisible, like being erased from my own story, as though my years of loyalty and sacrifice were not worthy of even a trace of acknowledgement. The documents with his name, the decisions made without me, the way the inheritance slipped from my grasp, it was not simply paper or signatures, it was an act of deliberate exclusion, a choice to strip me of my rights and leave me standing empty-handed while he carried away everything that bore our family's name. The pain had a way of echoing through every corner of my life, because when you are denied something that is rightfully yours, it poisons not just your present but your memories and your hopes for the future. I would look back at the years of obedience, the years I stood beside my family, the countless times I silenced my own desires to fulfill their expectations, and all of it suddenly felt like ashes, wasted efforts that were never valued. I thought of the times I told myself that patience would pay off, that hard work and loyalty would be rewarded, that justice, no matter how long it took, would always arrive, and yet here I was, stripped bare, robbed not just of inheritance but of the belief that the world, or even my own family, could ever be fair. I felt the humiliation in ways that words can hardly contain, because what he took was not hidden, what he did was not done in silence. Others knew, whispers circled, eyes followed me with pity or with judgment, and each look burned me deeper than the one before. It was as if everyone around me had been handed proof that I was powerless, that I had no voice, that even in my own bloodline I could be dismissed like a shadow with no weight. The pain carried with it a heavy shame, not because I had done anything wrong, but because betrayal often disguises itself as weakness on the part of the victim, and I was forced to carry the burden of appearing smaller, less important, less deserving in the eyes of the world. In the quiet moments, when I sat alone and replayed everything, the pain sharpened, cutting into me like glass, because I realized that the inheritance was more than material, it was meant to be a foundation, something to build a life on, something to provide security, something to honor the struggles of our parents. And now, instead of stability, I was left with uncertainty, instead of pride, I was left with humiliation, instead of hope, I was left with bitterness. The unfairness of it all sank into me, making every breath heavier, every day longer, and every thought darker, because nothing corrodes the heart like being denied what you deserve, what was promised, what was rightfully yours. I carried within me the weight of all the sacrifices I had made, sacrifices that now seemed pointless. I remembered how I put my own dreams on hold, how I stepped aside when others needed more, how I swallowed my pride in moments when I could have fought harder, believing that the future would balance itself, believing that fairness would prevail. But all those sacrifices became a cruel reminder that while I gave, others only took, and in the end, when it was my turn to receive, I was left with nothing. The pain was not just in the absence of inheritance but in the betrayal. The nights were the hardest, because sleep would not come easily. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, hearing the questions in my mind that had no answers. Why me? Why would my own brother strip me of what was mine? Was I too trusting, too blind, too naive to think that blood ties meant protection? The silence of those nights was unbearable, because every thought grew louder in the dark, and every memory of what I had lost sharpened into a blade that pierced deeper into me. The pain was not fleeting, it was a constant companion, a reminder stitched into my every breath that I had been robbed not only of inheritance but of the love and respect that should have guarded it. The injustice seeped into every aspect of my life. When I looked at others, I envied their security, their peace of mind, their ability to trust the bonds of their families. When I faced my own reflection, I saw someone bruised, someone robbed of power, someone diminished by the actions of another. The pain of being stripped of what was mine changed the way I walked, the way I spoke, the way I viewed the world. It hardened me, yes, but it also hollowed me, because to know that something you deserved was taken without remorse is to carry a permanent wound, a wound that never fully heals because fairness was never restored. And the pain was not just internal, it manifested in the world around me. My home felt colder, my days felt longer, my interactions with others grew distant, because a part of me had been stolen along with the inheritance. I found myself unable to celebrate the happiness of others, unable to trust words of comfort, unable to believe in promises, because what I had endured taught me that even the closest bonds could be broken, even the most sacred promises could be shattered. The inheritance was meant to protect me, to lift me, to remind me of my place, but instead, the loss of it left me vulnerable, exposed, and constantly reminded that even justice can be stolen by those who. Watching him live in comfort while I struggled was like standing outside a warm house in the dead of winter, staring through the window at a fire that was once meant to keep me alive too, but now only burned for him. Every day was a reminder that he had stolen not just my inheritance but also the security and ease that came with it, while I was left to wrestle with the storms of survival. I would see him dressed in fine clothes, driving cars that symbolized the weight of my loss, eating meals that carried the taste of my sacrifices, and living under a roof built with the very foundation that should have been shared with me. His comfort was a constant insult to my pain, because it was not earned honestly, it was stolen, and yet he carried himself with pride as if his fortune were the result of his own merit. The bitterness of that sight gnawed at me daily. Every time I opened my empty wallet, every time I hesitated at the market before buying something as simple as bread, every time I watched bills pile up like silent enemies, I thought of him reclining in ease, oblivious to the consequences of his betrayal. He never looked back to see the damage he left behind, never cared to imagine the weight of my struggles, never once reached out to acknowledge the devastation he had caused. Instead, he flourished in the life he built on my loss, smiling, entertaining guests, throwing celebrations, his world glittering with the stolen wealth of our family's legacy while mine grew darker with each passing day. There were mornings when I woke up exhausted from sleepless nights, my hands trembling with the stress of survival, and the thought of him waking in a bed of luxury made the pain twist deeper. His comfort was my punishment, his joy was my wound, his stability was my chaos. It was not jealousy that burned inside me but a sense of profound injustice. Because I did not envy what was rightfully mine to begin with, I resented the cruel reversal that forced me to fight for scraps. Each time I encountered him, his appearance carried the scent of comfort and privilege, and I could not help but feel the sharp contrast between his ease and my struggle. I saw him dining at places I could no longer afford, traveling to destinations I had once dreamed of, speaking of investments and opportunities made possible by the inheritance he had stolen. And there I was, scraping together coins to cover necessities, watching my dreams wither under the weight of endless survival. The gap between us was not just material, it was emotional, spiritual, and deeply personal, a constant reminder of how betrayal can divide siblings into two worlds, one bathed in light and the other cast into shadow. The pain of watching him thrive while I fought to breathe was compounded by the memories of how we once grew up side by side. We shared the same table, wore clothes washed in the same water, played under the same roof, and yet now, it felt as though we belonged to two different universes. I would catch glimpses of his laughter, his carefree stride, his unshaken confidence, and it was like looking at a stranger who had worn my brother's face but carried none of the bond that once tied us. The betrayal had already destroyed the foundation of our relationship, but his comfort in contrast to my suffering was the salt rubbed into that wound, ensuring it would never heal. What made it worse was the silence. He never acknowledged what I was going through, never extended even the smallest gesture of support, never showed a hint of remorse. To him, my suffering was invisible, or perhaps worse, irrelevant. He walked with the arrogance of someone who believed he deserved everything he had, and I was left behind as if my pain did not matter, as if my existence was an afterthought. That disregard was more painful than the loss of inheritance itself, because it showed me that he did not just take what was mine, he erased me from the very equation of his life. I felt the exhaustion of ever. Even when I tried to focus on rebuilding myself, his presence haunted me. Friends would speak of his successes, neighbors would gossip about his latest indulgences, and each word pierced me like a blade. It wasn't enough that I carried the burden of loss, I also had to endure the world praising the very person who had caused it. Every mention of his comfort echoed like a taunt in my ears, reminding me of my own hardships, forcing me to relive the betrayal again and again. The world seemed blind to the truth, applauding the image of his prosperity without knowing the blood price that had been paid for it, my blood, my sacrifices, my rightful inheritance. The struggle became more than financial, it was a struggle of spirit. While he lived in comfort, I wrestled with despair, questioning my worth, questioning the point of sacrifice, questioning whether honesty and loyalty were ever truly rewarded. My heart hardened with each reminder of his ease, and I carried the weight of injustice like a stone tied to my soul. The comfort he enjoyed was not just his victory, it was my torment, because I could not escape the reality that my suffering was the very foundation of his wealth. The sight of him thriving while I barely survived shaped me in ways I never asked for. It taught me that betrayal is not just a moment but a living wound that reopens every time the betrayer prospers. His comfort was not his alone, it was taken from me, it was built upon my loss, and no matter how far I tried to distance myself, the shadow of his ease stretched into every corner of my struggle. The twist, when he came back asking me for help, was almost too surreal to believe, because the very brother who had stripped me of everything, who had watched me struggle without remorse, who had thrived while I withered, now stood before me in need. It was as if the universe had spun its wheel and landed on irony so sharp that it cut through the air between us. I still remember the way he looked, not with the awe. Inside me, emotions collided like storms. There was anger that still burned from the betrayal, anger that made me want to spit his request back in his face and remind him of the nights I went hungry, the days I labored endlessly, the humiliation I endured while he enjoyed the comfort he stole from me. But there was also a strange satisfaction rising within me, a sense of justice finally turning its gaze toward me, showing me that even those who rise on the wings of betrayal eventually fall. The sight of him asking me for help was not just ironic, it was vindicating, because it showed me that his comfort had been fragile, built on a foundation of lies and theft that could not last forever. Yet, as I stood there listening to him, I felt something else as well, something deeper, something I could not easily name. It was the conflict between blood and betrayal, the undeniable bond of family clashing against the deep wound of injustice. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave him drowning in the same helplessness he had forced me to endure. Another part of me, however, could not entirely silence the voice that whispered of our shared history, our childhood under the same roof, our laughter before greed tore us apart. That conflict tore at me, because revenge promised satisfaction, but compassion tugged at a part of me I thought I had buried. I watched him as he spoke, his shoulders hunched, his eyes unable to meet mine for long, and I realized how far he had fallen. The arrogance was gone, the pride stripped away, and in its place was a man who finally understood what it meant to lose, to be vulnerable, to need. For a fleeting moment, I almost saw the brother I once knew, the one I had defended, the one I had trusted, before betrayal had turned him into a stranger. But then the memories of his theft surged back, the images of him living in comfort while I suffered, and the scar he left in my heart burned fresh. The twist was not just in his request but in the way it forced me to confront my own heart. I had dreamed of a day when he would pay, when the weight of his actions would come crashing down on him, but I had not imagined that repayment would come in the form of him seeking my aid. It was almost cruel how fate placed the power back in my hands, giving me the choice to either mirror his betrayal or rise above it. And in that moment, I understood the true nature of revenge. It is not just about watching the betrayer fall, but about facing the question of who you will become when the balance shifts in your favor. As he pleaded, his words revealed more of his fall. Business deals gone wrong, debts piling up, the friends who once surrounded him in his wealth now gone when his fortune faded. He painted a picture of desperation, a man cornered by his own choices, stripped of the illusion of control. And the irony of it all struck me harder than his request itself, because once, I had stood in that same place, struggling alone, stripped of support, left to carry the weight of life without relief, and he had turned his back on me without hesitation. Now, it was his turn to taste that same isolation, that same bitter flavor of need, and yet he sought to escape it by leaning on the very person he had wronged. I could see the cracks in him as he spoke, the fear of rejection, the humiliation of lowering himself, the desperation of needing what he no longer had. And though my heart had hardened from years of pain, I could not deny the power I felt in that moment. For so long, he had held the cards, he had lived in triumph while I drowned in despair, but now the roles had reversed. I was the one holding the decision, the one in control, the one with the ability to shape what happened next. The twist was not just his downfall, it was my rise, my chance to reclaim a piece of what had been taken from me, not in wealth, but in power and dignity. The silence that followed his request was heavy, filled with the ghosts of everything we had been through. I looked at him and saw not just a brother but a man undone by his own greed, a man who had believed betrayal would secure him forever, only to find himself crumbling in the same way he had left me to crumble. The twist was sharp, unforgiving, and it brought with it a strange clarity that no matter how long betrayal thrives, it always circles back, and when it does, it demands a price heavier than anyone expects. The inner conflict between family loyalty and justice tore through me with a force I had never known, because it was not simply a matter of choosing what was right or wrong, it was a matter of blood and betrayal, of love and loss, of the ties that bind and the wounds that divide. On one hand, he was my brother, the boy I once laughed with, the boy I once protected, the boy who shared the same parents, the same meals, the same home, and no matter how much I wanted to deny it, there was a part of me that still remembered him that way. On the other hand, he was the man who had stripped me of my inheritance, the man who left me to suffer while he thrived, the man who turned his back when I needed him most, and justice demanded that I do to him what he had done to me, turn away, let him crumble, let him taste the same bitter lonel. Every fiber of my being pulled me in opposite directions. Family loyalty whispered that no matter the crime, no matter the betrayal, blood is blood, and it is sacred, and that to abandon him now would mean betraying not only him but also the memory of our parents who had raised us to stand together. Justice, however, roared louder, reminding me of the nights I starved, the tears I shed, the humiliation I swallowed, all because he chose greed over brotherhood, and it demanded that I honor those wounds by refusing to heal his. It was as if I carried two voices inside me, one pleading for mercy and one demanding vengeance, and neither would fall silent. I thought of my mother's face, the way she used to hold our hands together and tell us that siblings are meant to protect each other, that when the world turns cruel, family is the one place you can find shelter. Those lessons haunted me, because standing before him now, I did not know if shelter was something he deserved. I thought of my father's sacrifices, the inheritance he built with his hard work, meant to secure us both, and how my brother twisted that legacy into a weapon of betrayal. If I helped him, was I honoring my parents' teachings of unity, or was I spitting on their memory by rewarding the very son who shattered their intentions? The weight of those questions pressed down on me until I felt suffocated. In my heart, there was still love, faint but undeniable, a flicker of the bond that time and betrayal had not entirely extinguished. It whispered to me when I least expected it, when I remembered our childhood laughter, when I thought of the times we defended each other against the world, when I recalled the way we once dreamed of building a future side by side. That love told me that perhaps everyone deserves a chance at redemption, that maybe his suffering was punishment enough, that helping him could be a way to heal not just him but also myself. And yet, justice was there to strike back, reminding me I wrestled with memories that played in loops. The day I discovered he had stolen what was mine, the days I suffered in silence while he paraded in luxury, the nights I cried until sleep finally claimed me, and all the times he ignored my existence when he was living well. Those memories rose like shadows every time the thought of helping him crossed my mind, and each one whispered the same thing: justice demands that he feel what I felt. But then there were other memories, gentler ones, of him holding my hand when we were children, of us sharing secrets late at night, of us mourning together when we first lost someone dear, and those memories pulled me back toward loyalty. It was as though my heart had been split into two, each half demanding that I betray the other. The inner conflict seeped into my body, making me restless, making my nights sleepless, making my days heavy with indecision. I found myself staring at him, searching his eyes for something, remorse, perhaps, or recognition of the pain he caused, anything that could guide me toward choosing between mercy and justice. Sometimes I thought I saw it, a flicker of guilt, a shadow of regret, and in those moments loyalty tightened its grip on me, whispering that perhaps he had learned, perhaps he was not the same man who betrayed me. Other times I saw nothing but desperation, a hunger to save himself at any cost, and in those moments justice clenched its fist inside me, demanding that I not be fooled again. It was not just about him, it was about me, about the kind of person I wanted to be, about the values I wanted to carry. If I chose justice and turned him away, I feared I would carry the stain of cruelty, that I would become as cold as he once was, that I would let betrayal define me completely. If I chose loyalty and helped him, I feared I would betray myself, that I would once again sacrifice my dignity and worth for someone who had proven he did not deserve it. Both paths carried pain, both paths carried. I imagined the whispers of others, what they would say if they knew. Some would call me heartless if I refused him, some would call me foolish if I helped him, and both judgments would weigh heavily on me. But the true weight was not in their voices, it was in the war inside me, a war between my heart and my wounds, between the softness that still longed for family and the scars that demanded justice. Each time I looked at him, I felt the tug of that war. I saw the brother I once loved, and I saw the betrayer who had ruined me. I heard the echo of our parents' teachings about unity, and I heard the echo of my own screams in the dark when I was left alone in suffering. I felt the sting of injustice, and I felt the ache of love, and I did not know which one deserved my loyalty more. The conflict grew heavier with every passing moment, stretching me between two worlds that could not coexist. Family loyalty told me to forgive, to help, to restore what little remained of our bond. Justice told me to refuse, to punish, to honor the pain I had endured. And there I stood, torn in half, caught between the voice of my blood and the voice of my scars, knowing that whatever choice I made, a part of me would always wonder if it was the wrong one. The power shift when I finally held control over his fate was unlike anything I had ever experienced, because for so long I had lived in the shadow of his betrayal, stripped of what was mine, reduced to struggling while he thrived, and suddenly the roles were reversed. It was as if the universe had turned its gaze and placed the balance of justice squarely in my hands. For years I had been the one begging for fairness, the one carrying the weight of loss, the one silenced by his arrogance, and now it was him who stood before me humbled, desperate, his pride shattered, his voice trembling as he asked for help from the sibling he had once cast aside. In that moment, the air itself felt charged, heavy with the knowledge that I could decide. I saw it in his face, the fear, the desperation, the way his eyes darted as if searching for mercy in mine, the way his words stumbled over themselves as he tried to convince me that he deserved another chance. This was not the brother who once laughed at my struggles from his comfortable seat of privilege. This was a man broken by his own choices, standing on fragile ground, and it was me who decided whether he would sink or stand. The irony of it all hit me with a force so strong it was almost dizzying, because I remembered vividly the nights I had stood in his place, desperate, broken, pleading, and he had turned his back without hesitation. Now, the same scenario had unfolded, but the roles were reversed, and the justice of that reversal was sharper than any blade. Holding power over him was not just about deciding his fate, it was about reclaiming my own. For so long, my identity had been tied to the betrayal, to the loss, to the humiliation of being robbed of what was mine, but in this moment, I was no longer the victim. I was no longer the powerless sibling cast aside by greed. I was the one who had the ability to say yes or no, the one whose word could determine the outcome, the one in control. That realization lit something inside me, a fire that spread through every wound he had left in me, turning scars into symbols of strength.